Hello, and welcome back to my channel. For those new, uh, do check out my YouTube channel page. I got lots of different videos there, lots of things to discover. For those returning, welcome back. I hope you've checked out my other videos before. Have you been taking care of each other and being kind to yourselves, my viewers? This episode of Northstar Talks Politics is rather on the nose, and I felt best to start with a blank screen here before jumping into it. Don't worry, there will be visuals. As the title says, staring at evil. Now, first of all, I'm going to have to quote some very bad people here, starting with, because this is about parallels, starting with Hermann Goering, the monster who created the Gestapo in Nazi Germany. Criminal, evil mastermind. You got to understand the past to understand what's going on in the present. Start off with this. And I want to say something, by the way, very quickly. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And the role filled by Goering is not at all unlike the role filled by this guy. They even look a little bit similar at a very superficial glance, at least Goering in his later years when he got very overweight. Boom, boom. Goering was a war hero from World War I, supposedly, who got fully in bed with the Nazi vileness of a fighter pilot. And honestly, Trump's borders there's some real parallels in the function of these individuals. People assume that the Nazis were always ranting, raving, insane sounding. They weren't. They were vile. They could sound reasonable at first glance, and they were not. Everything they said was predicated on lies and manipulation of the truth. Same thing could be said about Trump's people. They can sound reasonable at first glance, particularly this guy. But he's a liar through and through, who, if you didn't hear, the FBI is investigating him taking $50,000 in bribes for kickbacks for a contract, but, that's just the tip of the iceberg with the corruption in MAGA. In 1934, Nazi deputy leader Hermann Goering provided his own account of the formation of the Gestapo the previous year. Goering explained this was necessary to, quote, proceed against the enemies of the state with total ruthlessness and eradicate the insane worldview held by millions of Germans. Now, the Nazis were a little more on the nose about saying things because they didn't have the world going back and looking at, the Nazis, this previous monstrosity of fascism, and being able to, if they are too on the nose these days, the parallels become too blatant. So it's a little more clever now, but you'll see that there are definite echoes here. For weeks, I personally undertook the work of reorganization, and finally it was my personal decision to create the secret state police office. That is the Gestapo. This instrument, so much feared by our enemies, is the principal reason why in Germany and Prussia there is no Marxist or communist menace. So create an outside group, set them up as a menace. Ignoring in seniority, I put the most able men into the secret state police office and put it under one of the most able young officials. Instead of taking the most qualified people, taking the ideological fanatics. Sound familiar? That's what's going on with ICE. It's not always seniority. It's not law enforcement experience. It's people who are the most vicious, vile, loyalists. They're the ones being promoted. Daily, I'm again and again convinced that I chose the right men. The job that the office chief, Rudolf Diels, and his men did will always remain one of the principal achievements of the first year of German recovery. The SA and SS, the SA was the paramilitary wing of the Nazis. It'd be considered like the Proud Boys and stuff in America today. Not officially affiliated, always. A little more direct connection, but or not official branch, but sort of. I mean, there were more connections with the Nazis because nowadays they hide these things better. But the far right hate groups that then cooperate with the regime today are really filling a similar role, even though they're not officially affiliated with the Republicans in any way. Without their help, I would never have been able to master enemies so quickly. Since then, I have once again reorganized the secret police and put them under my direct command. It's always about direct control command. By means of a network of offices around Germany, with Berlin as the headquarters, I'm kept informed daily, even hourly, of everything that happens in diverse regions of Prussia. The last hideout of the communists is known to us, and no matter how often they change their tactics or rename their quarters, within a few days they're again tracked down, registered, monitored, and broken up. We have had to proceed against the enemies of the state with total ruthlessness. It must not be forgotten that when we took over the government, over 6 million people still support the communists. Bit of historical perspective here. The population in Germany was around 60 million. So this would be like over 30 million people in the United States today if you do, population ratios. And of course, you didn't have children or the infirm, very elderly involved. So really about 30% of the voting population, somewhere between 20 and 34%, according to most historians, were people who voted with the Communist Party. This created fear among the billionaires. Now, we haven't come to that point in America. There is no left because of the Red Scare, McCarthyism, and endless propaganda that leftists are the enemy. I'll tell you folks something. No, they're not. They are not. I'm not a communist, but I will say that the communists are very much allies of ordinary people who want a better world and are not a danger to them. The real danger comes from the fascists who take fake populist rhetoric and use it to crush and oppress and intimidate and bully and murder people. Anyways, the greater part were good Germans led astray by this insane worldview. Well, it's not the Nazis who are insane, but also by the spinelessness and weakness of the middle class parties. This is a key little bit. He's referring to the so-called weakness, spinelessness of the Social Democratic Party of Germany, which did prove itself indeed to be spineless when they caved to the Nazis and encouraged their members in many cases to cooperate with the, quote, New World Order, in many cases disbanding their own local branches. This was not the top leadership doing it, but local branches of the Social Democrats in certain cities disbanded themselves and encouraged their members to join the Nazis. I kid you not. Vorensburg or something is a famous, well-recorded example of this. I think it was Vorensburg, or was it Vorarlberg? All the greater was the need to rescue these people from error and to lead them back into the national community, nationalism. But it was also just as necessary to proceed mercilessly against the deceivers, the agitators. Note the word agitators, which, by the way, AI will always lead you astray and produce misinformation these days when it comes to political stuff. When I was just Google searching to get some of this stuff, it was trying to say, oh, there was no quote where Goering used the word agitators. Yes, there is. This is a direct quote of him right here. And he didn't use the word that often. He's quoted as saying it all the time, but he did in certain speeches, and this is one of them, in interviews. And the leader, well, this is an interview, and the leaders themselves. Thus, concentration camps are established in which we had first to intern thousands of officials of the Communist and Social Democratic parties. Mostly communists. This is true. The concentration camps were initially set up for communists and some of the most radical members of the Social Democratic Party, those who wouldn't go along with disbanding themselves and caving to the Nazis, some local officials. Most of their leadership was all too glad to cooperate with the Nazis, partly because out of fear and seeing what happened to those who wouldn't cooperate. The communists fought the Nazis to the bitter end. And two-thirds of the mid-level party leadership of the Communist Party of Germany, the KPD, Communist Party Deutschland, were arrested by the Nazis. And the concentration camps initially housed them before they started throwing gay people, before they started throwing Roma, before they started throwing Jewish people in concentration camps. They did it to the communists first. Then they would later expand to more and more members of the Social Democrats, those who wouldn't disband themselves and such and wouldn't cooperate, which there weren't many. And then the trade union movement, which the trade unionists were a little more stubborn and had a little more grit than the Social Democrats. They arrested a number of trade unionists. Hence the famous poem, first they came for the communists, then they came for the socialists, or Social Democrats, then they came for the trade unionists. And it goes on until then they came for the Jews, then they came for me. Of course, the first group the Nazis came for wasn't the communists, it was the disabled. They murdered them in hospitals. In like the middle of the night, they would do euthanasia. That was before they started imprisoning. I mean, they had already, I think, imprisoned many of the leaders of the Communist Party before they started imprisoning most of the rank and file, and moved on to the socialists and trade unionists in larger numbers. It was only natural that certain excesses occur in the beginning. Of course, here excesses, right? That's a euphemism and a lie to pretend it was accidental. Of course, here and there, innocents were also affected. Of course, here and there, a few beatings took place and brutal acts were committed. But measures against everything that preceded, and against the greatness of the occasion, but measured against everything that preceded, and against the greatness of the occasion, this German revolution for freedom was the most bloodless and most disciplined revolution in history. Counter-revolution and hardly bloodless. Now, things aren't that far along yet. Though maybe this guy will be giving a speech like that someday in a couple years now, talking about things he did now, or an interview. This guy, Tom Homan, I'll start with text and then I'll play a little snippet of the video. President Donald Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, said Thursday that the number of immigration enforcement officers in Minnesota will be reduced only after cooperation from state officials. Mind you, there was this little speech. I can find transcripts of it, but I can't find the video anymore. CNN has like buried it. I can find the transcripts, but hearing me read off the transcript is a little less convincing. Where he says, "Oh, we're going to draw down all immigration officials," and then he says this less than a day later, while making sure that that news conference is well publicized at the time. And then, of course, there's a lot of public lashback, and suddenly CNN makes it hard to find because CNN is very much part of the loyal opposition. They're bullied into going along with this and to not making too much of a ruckus about fascism that's taking over America, because they're corporate media. Will be reduced only after cooperation from state officials, and he has, quote, zero tolerance for protesters assault his officers or impede their work. Except no one was assaulting his officers. People were murdered were not assaulting his officers. They were, quote, impeding work by observing them, by recording them. The guy was shot 10 times on the ground. Did try and come between some officers who were assaulting two women who were completely nonviolent. They were pushing him around, shoving him to the ground. And, between the officers and the woman, he stood between them, and then they started assaulting him, wrestled him on the ground, and shot him 10 times. But broadly speaking, that's a sad nonsense excuse for murdering people. Watch Homan's news conference in the video player. This is not. This is a second or longer news conference, but there was a very brief one given somewhere else. This isn't even the same background that really went over poorly. Homan addressed reporters for the first time since the president sent him to Minneapolis after a federal immigration officer fatally shot a protester on Saturday. They shot more than one protester. Homan doubled down on the need for local jails to alert immigration customs enforcement to people in their custody whom ICE can remove from the country. Mind you, you can end up in a local jail just for an unpaid traffic ticket. If you're arrested, you can spend a night in jail. That happens for just an unpaid parking fine or speeding ticket. And besides, people shouldn't lose their right to exist. Their humanity shouldn't be targeted so much just because of one misstep. This whole way we treat criminals as the other, and I mean, even calling the criminals people who've committed any crime is, they suddenly lose all their rights. It's fascism in itself, that treatment, and it's vile. Anyways, it's part of how fascism goes along, is making an other out of anyone who's committed a crime and then rewriting the laws so ordinary people become criminals if they oppose the regime. Homan doubled down on the need for local jails to alert immigration and customs enforcement to people in their custody whom ICE can remove from the country, and that transferring immigrants to ICE while they're still in jail is safer for the officers. Oh, because the focus is all on the officers, even though none of them have been killed in Minneapolis. And at least at the time I'm recording this, that unless there's something that's about to break news, and means they aren't out on the streets. So I wouldn't be surprised if people start doing that now. The officer's been murdering people. Someone might try and retaliate. Homan said that would mean fewer officers have to actually be out in the streets looking for immigrants in the country illegally, i.e., fewer officers out there murdering people is the subtext. Give us access to legal aliens, and of course he's calling that, instead of undocumented immigrants, which is the official term, public safety threats in the safety and security of a jail, Homan said, as if someone was a public safety threat just by being undocumented. Homan acknowledged the immigration enforcement operations in Minnesota haven't been perfect, but was also adamant the administration isn't, quote, surrendering their mission. Homan also, well, he doesn't say that, but that's the words used, and it really should have been put in quotes, but biased in reporting. Homan also seemed to suggest, and in this case biased in favor of Homan, but to be clear, Homan also seemed to suggest a renewed focus on what ICE calls, quote, target operations, to put that in quotes, designed to focus their efforts on apprehending immigrants who have committed crimes. He said he would conduct, they've never done that. They've never focused very much on that, and they're never going to. He said they would conduct, quote, targeted strategic enforcement operations, prioritizing, quote, public safety threats. He said he had, quote, zero tolerance for those who assault or impede law enforcement, except that's a sorry excuse for murdering people, referring to the protesters who flood the city street as, and this is something fascists always say, agitators. Calling anyone agitators stands up to the monsters. Homan did not give specific timeline for how long he would stay in Minnesota. Did not give a specific timeline. I'm staying until the problem is gone, he said, adding that he has met elected officials and law enforcement leaders across the city and state, seeking to find common ground, and suggested they've made some progress. Sounds, at first glance, he might sound reasonable to some people, but he's a liar and a monster and a thief who's stolen money, kickbacks. He is a felon. He is a criminal. Trump, I think, already pardoned him for it, but he committed a crime. He should be in jail for taking $50,000 in bribes. Kickbacks. Notice he's calling bad guy. He's using simplistic language that demonizes an us and them's people. Oh, right, because laws are always legitimate if they're passed, even by a Congress that doesn't represent the ordinary people, that's owned and controlled by billionaires, and that's influenced by a corporate media that's also owned and controlled by billionaires. Both Congress is and the voters are brainwashed by media that's owned by a very rich few, Rupert Murdoch and such. CNN is not really much better. NBC is owned by a defense contractor, for crying out loud, through a bunch of shell companies. Except that's not what's going to happen. I think that's enough of that, but he's the reasonable sounding voice of the regime. Just as Goering was the reasonable sounding voice of the Nazis, at least at the time. We all understand what a monster he was in hindsight. Here's something else, and this is worth one little quote to leave this, because this relates to what's going on with Venezuela, Greenland, etc., etc. Goering, why, of course the people don't want war. Why would some poor slob on a farm want to risk his life in a war when the best that he can get out of it is to come back to his farm in one piece? Remarkably clear-minded about how war doesn't actually benefit ordinary people, despite all the Nazi propaganda to the contrary. Naturally, the common people don't want war, neither in Russia, nor in England, nor in America, nor for that matter in Germany. That is understood. But after all, it is the leaders of the country who determine the policy. Authoritarianism, the government, it doesn't matter what ordinary people want. And it is always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it is a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or a parliament. He's referring to a constitutional monarchy or a communist dictatorship. Gilbert, this is the guy interviewing him at the time. There's one difference. In a democracy, the people have some say in the matter through their elected representatives. In the United States, only Congress can declare wars. We've seen how that's gone with undeclared war after undeclared war after undeclared war. president just bypassing Congress over and over and over and over since then. Oh, that is all well and good, but voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they're being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country. An interview with Gilbert in Goering's jail cell during the Nuremberg war crimes trials, April 18th, 1946. Remember that. People can always be brought to bidding of the leaders. All that this is a quote about how fascist authoritarians, these monsters, they really think about you and me. And it's a little bit clear-sighted about how authoritarian systems really work, and even about the lies that underlie systems that claim to be more democratic, but it is monstrous in the end. Instead of saying, well, this is bad, we should change this, we just should have a system where people's views are actually represented, he just leans into it and embraces the evil. Take care of each other, be kind to yourselves, and may you always find a guiding star leading you home. Until next time, it's Northstar Do, and best luck to you all.